Hello. All right. Thanks everyone for coming out. I want to thank B-Sides Nova for having me here. This is my first time as a speaker. So this is me jumping outside of the box and getting from behind the analyst keyboard and actually sharing some of the ideas and things that I've been working on in the past and what I plan to do in the future. So the name of this talk is Bro, I Can See You Moving Laterally. A lot of people are confused about the name of the talk. It's not about bros, like in the fact of the guys like in the gym pumping iron. It's actually about the security tool, Bro Network Security Monitoring. A little bit about myself. I'm a defender at heart. I love defending. I'm an incident responder at Chicago Mercantile Exchange. I'm based out of the New York area, but I've been working in the DC area to start out my career. So I'm always tied back to DC, Virginia area, which is why I, put in my hat to speak at this conference. I'm an NSM fanboy. I love anything NSM. I'll go over Security Onion, which was used to draft a lot of this data that I had in this talk. And I have a healthy obsession, sometimes unhealthy obsession, with finding new ways to detect malicious activity attackers. Some people shy away from, attackers ending up on the network, and, for most folks it's a bad day. But I see that as an opportunity to learn more about my attacker and about new ways to defend in general. And on Twitter, I'm RR Cyrus. Like I said, this talk is primarily about Bro. Show of hands, how many people are familiar or have heard of Bro? Wow, great. So I'll go over a little bit about Bro logs. The Bro SMB analyzer, which was introduced in Bro version 2.5, which is pretty new, which is the current version right now. And also going over Bro scripting, using the Bro scripting language to do a lot of these things. So one issue that we have in security is that we focus a lot on trying to protect attackers from getting inside the network. And so there's a lot of things set up where you have a firewall set up, you're making sure you're logging activity hidden externally, but nothing is really mentioned about when the attackers are in, and that's when a lot of breaches happen, where the attacker has a foothold in, they go dark from an analysis perspective, and things are happening behind the scenes, and we aren't able to detect it. So that's the problem statement of my talk. Particularly lateral movement. So now they're on the network. That might be from an email attachment that was, someone clicked on, it bypassed AV, and now they're on an actual host in the network, and they're moving from system to system to carry out their objectives wherever it might be, whether it's gathering more information or actually gathering, secret data that they want to exfil out. One way that attackers use, one technique for lateral movement is actually SMB, using the SMB protocol. That might be to mount Windows shares, also to move files across the file share themselves, because this is considered normal activity within the network. You have a bunch of file share activity going on. It's enabled. It's kind of a way to blend in with normal traffic. There's, printer services going on. Folks usually host a bunch of company files, like in a particular shares or multiple shares. So their movement using SMB is likely to go undetected if you're not looking for it. A little bit about SMB protocol. This talk is primarily focused on SMB protocol 2.x, primarily with Windows 7. 3.0 is for Windows 10 and Windows 8.1, etc. So typically in the past, when we go about looking for malicious SMB activity, specifically attackers using tools like PSExec and moving files from file share to file share, computer to computer, primarily like C $, admin $. Typically the methods used are, for one, snort. You have a snort rule that might detect usage of PSExec, and there's ways to get around that. And then Windows logging, where you have the GPO setting to audit for file share access and file share objects. And so those are some of the event IDs created. And so with that, because snort rules, you know, depending on how you have it architectured, you may miss something. And with window logs, you have to collect all those window logs and put them in a location and correlate them and generate use cases for them. And that might be difficult for some companies to do. So the alternative solution is Bro. And so Bro Network Security Monitor, it's able to grab some of the metadata from popular network protocols, as you may know, as HTTP, FTP, RDP. And so SMB was added to that in version 2.5. So you could grab file metadata as well, some of the hashes about the hash information about the file, what kind of file it is, if it's a Windows executable. These are things that might be helpful for analysts to know. Also alerting. You have the ability to send alerts to a notice.log in your logs directory in a custom or a default Bro installation. And so you will look in that notice log for things of interest that are happening on the network. And with the Bro logs themselves, they are easy to pump into a SIM solution, or you can grep them. You can use the tool Bro Cut to make it a little bit easier on the eyes to grab particular information that is interesting to you. And this is an example of a Bro log. And so you see you have a UID, and that UID could be used to match multiple events across logs. And then you have the ID original H, which is your source ID, and then the source port is the original underscore P seen there, and then the protocol, which you see in this case is UDP. This is an example of the connection log, if you've never seen a Bro log before. Bro logs really are by default kind of difficult to work with, especially the way you size the window that you have. So you could use something like, you could pump it through dash S, and it might make it a little bit easier. You could scroll across the screen to see all the fields, not in this jumbled format. So like I mentioned before, with Bro version 2.5, they enabled SMB as a protocol and introduced the analyzer. Now it's not installed by default, by the way. So what you have to do is it's commented out in your local.bro file, and what you have to do is uncomment that out and then use Bro control to deploy that again, so it's implemented and actually monitoring for that, using the SMB analyzer to grab that metadata. And so these are some of the SMB logs that were introduced. SMB.cmd, cmd.log, some of the SMB commands that are being run, SMB files, so any files moved across with SMB. Also SMB mapping, any SMB tree activity, and NTLM log and RPC.log. And so Bro scripting is based on C and C++. It also has a notice framework. So what you would see with a lot of Bro scripting is that you can look at activity that is happening on the network, look at the logs, and then create a script based on a particular use case you're trying to solve. And that's what I did primarily in the research that I've done so far. A lot of SOC teams would do the same thing, and it's kind of repetitive. So you would look for some malicious activity going on, and you would find a way to automate that so that you can do some correlation between the different logs, maybe SMB logs and maybe RDP logs, and then create a different notice that isn't built in by default. You could do that through the notice framework, which allows for alerting. So once you do that, it kind of cuts the time to actually detect something malicious, like pumping through each of those, looking through each of those separate logs. You could just go to the notice log and do the correlation there. And now if you wanted background information, then you could go into those separate logs to get more details. And the files framework is something that I used to start to detect this malicious SMB activity, only because you want to try to catch SMB files going back and forth. So the files framework was helpful in doing so. Now, the scripts that I wrote, I'll have the GitHub page for that. It was 3 particular scripts, just 3 use cases that I found for SMB. One is if you have an SMB file that attacker, they're on the system already inside your environment, and now they're moving malicious files between computers, mounting them to file shares. So that's something that you would have some interest in detecting. One problem that's wrong with that is that you have one particular antivirus solution on your network, right? And so if that antivirus solution misses that particular binary, that particular file, then again, you're in the dark. And so what I thought, what occurred to me was like, hey, why don't you just check the file, to catch some low-hanging fruit. If it's known to be bad, you can submit the hash to VirusTotal to see, okay, what other antivirus vendors are saying about this file. And so what I did with this script was that anytime there's a file that was transferred over SMB, it'll use the files framework to grab the hash and take the hash using VirusTotal API with the API key and send it to VirusTotal. And if it comes back with a certain amount of positives, then it would generate a notice to the notice log. So that's low-hanging fruit, but it's a start, right? And so accessing SMB shares, admin shares. So you might have some administrators that might do this, but for the most part, this shouldn't be happening. So this is access to IPC $, admin $, C $, D $ for like your drives. In a normal environment, I tested it at home in in a lab environment, but if you have file sharing enabled throughout your network, you would have a lot of activity between the domain controller and maybe hosts on your network. So if you want, you could take the scripts that I've introduced a little further and put in some whitelisting for stuff that is kind of normal. But in this case, this shouldn't be happening too often. And so anytime that occurs, it will send a notice. It will send a alert to the notice log. Okay, so in most environments, everyone has a naming convention similar to this. And so what I found interesting in the NTLM log, which I'll get into later, a particular tool that is used by pen testers. If they're sloppy and they do not change the host name of that particular distribution, then the host name is a random host name that doesn't match your company's naming convention in the NTLM log, and that's another way to detect some malicious activity going on. So for this, it was like, hey, SecNet is our company name, and it's a Windows device, and it's a host, and it's located in Virginia, and we gave it the tagging ID of 001. So anything outside of the script basically checks for any NTLM host name that's outside of this naming convention. And then it'll send it to the notice log. And so I'll get into a quick demo. I didn't want to test the demo god, so I pre-recorded this. All right, so to give you some background on what's going on right now, so there's maybe a penetration tester, a malicious actor that's out there that has compromised a system on the network, and now this is them going through the process of moving laterally and looking for files of interest and moving files from system to system. So this is the view from the attacker side, and then it will switch to the analyst side where you'll get to see some of the bro logs. So the analyst doesn't have any background about what just happened. This is just the view that we're seeing from the attacker side.
This is happening in the future, right? Sunday.
Yep. And so here is a remote desktop with some credentials that they've had on the network. So remote desktop RDP to some machine on their internal network. Now they're launching sysinternals PSExec to kind of blend in with regular traffic. And so they're using PSExec to basically spawn a command shell on another box in their environment. So you see they logged into .106, and now they're going to .107. So this is the PSExec service that is starting. By the way, as an attacker, this is pretty noisy, and a lot of attackers are moving away from this. So they're using stuff like WMI exec and SMB exec, and that could be detected too with some of the scripts I've introduced. And so they now are on the system. They went to the desktop, and now they're looking for files of interest. So they found this daily list, and check out that list. There's lunch involved, there's brief the director on bro IDS, and then, well, at the bottom, go home and drink some beer, because who doesn't love beer after a long day of work? And so now they've jumped out of that, and now they're going to the documents, because, hey, there are always good things in the documents folder. So there's a text file in there called secret location, and maybe sounds like it might be of interest. Let's look in there. So there's a business deal going down with Bugs Bunny, and there's carrots involved, and there's a location. So that's something that, hey, now that attackers gain that information, and maybe they could disrupt the deal or take someone out before they get to the deal. Now, this is the attacker using Xcopy to move Windows Update.exe to the other system, .107, and you'll see this activity pretty soon. So they moved it to their desktop, right? The Windows Update.exe. They moved it to the desktop on that same system, and now they're going to execute that Windows Update.exe. And guess what it is? Mimikatz. And so from here, they're just going to use the Mimikatz tool to dump some credential information. I learned a little bit about Mimikatz with this too. I restarted the virtual machine before this, and so the logon passwords are null. Because there's no, it's not cached, anything, the credentials aren't cached. So me being a defender, I'm always using, some attacker tools to kind of get wrap my mind around what's going on. And that's just something interesting I learned. I advise anyone that's who's a defender, to actually use some of these, offensive tools to get a handle of what attackers are actually using, or even pen testers or red teamers. So now this is Kali Linux, this is Metasploit, console. They're using the Metasploit PSExec module to do the same thing, and we'll see what that looks like shortly on the analyst side. So they're using those same credentials from Daffy Duck that they used to RDP to the other system. And now this is from the analyst side. So as the analyst, you're like, oh, frying up my bro logs. Let's look in the notice log. See if there's anything interesting there. Whoa, that's pretty ugly, but luckily enough, I highlighted it, so it's better on the eyes. So now you see that PSExec svc.exe, and that was submitted to VirusTotal with a hit count of 3 positives, and so the analyst sees that, like, hey, I want to see more about this file. He goes to VirusTotal and looks up the hash just to confirm that it's PSExec. SHA-256, yep. And so this is just using the script itself just uses the VirusTotal API to grab the JSON down and parse it, and then get some of these fields. And so we want to see what other activity, using that ID that we saw, we want to see what other activity came from that PSExec. And so you can see the use of the admin $. So you caught the PSExec and the use of admin $, in that case. Now we're going to look at the notice log again, and sure enough, we see Windows Update.exe. That got a hit count of 39. We know that as Mimikatz, but as an analyst, he's about to have a really bad day. Because there's no context around that, right? You just see a hit count of 39. You're like, uh-oh. And yeah, Mimikatz. Anytime you have Mimikatz on your network, it's a bad day. And so we're going to look at some of the activity that came from the copying of that Mimikatz file to the other system. If I could type in demos. And so you see the IPC $share was used to copy that using Xcopy. So then now we're back in the notice log, and sure enough, PSExec from Metasploit created that randomized suspicious hostname that now it flagged that said potential rogue hostname on the network. And I found what was interesting in this is NTLM is a different NTLM version that's used. I think it's like version 1 that's flagged, because initially the script was for version 2 and it didn't pick it up, and I was like wondering why. And I looked and pulled a PCAP and it's version 1, which was weird, but. And so you see the use of the IPC $admin $ with Metasploit PSExec. And so now we're just going through and getting some more information about the activity that occurred from the logs themselves that were used in the scripts. So here we are going to SMB mapping log, and this gives you an idea of some of the shares that were actually used throughout that whole activity. Also, the files log, it gives you an idea of what's in the files log. You have the name of the file and also the file share that was used. So this is in the SMB files log, not the general files log. This is the general PE log right here that tells you, hey, it's a Windows executable. Yes, what's interesting about this is before this talk is actually a spin-off of a gold paper that I've written for SANS. And before that, I've never worked with Bro in an environment setting or even, long term. This paper was an opportunity for me to actually deep dive into Bro itself and create some use cases that I would use in my own day-to-day job as an incident responder. Also, one thing to note is that from a detection perspective, a lot of, you hear a lot of red teamers or a lot of pen testers say, hey, defenders have to close up all these holes, and once we're in, we're in. I like to combat that a little bit. If you're in a secure SOC or secure security environment, and you're very mature, you can actually, kind of raise their level too, because once that activity is flagged and then haven't carried out all their operations that they wanted to, yes, they're inside, but nothing has happened. So if you caught them at the side that, hey, they got, PSExec running, they got Mimikatz running, and now they just they got the credential dump, they're moving laterally, you can now detect them, root them out, and when you root them out, they now know, hey, they pick that up. And so now the bar to entry to come back in and get to that same step is a lot harder. And so that's something Matt Swan from Microsoft introduced a little while back, the incident response pyramid. And so with this, you can track is different steps that these Bro scripts can be part of. The detection part, actually tracking adversary activity. You could use Bro for hunting with some of these SMB logs. So it's literally the Bro detecting, in this case, the attacker, Bro, because, hey, we all like to name attackers. And that's the end of my talk. I'll put the slides out on my blog, securityneversleeps.net, and the scripts are in this location, so if you want to take a screenshot, you can take a screenshot of that. And if you have any questions, find me here, and my Twitter handle is RRCyrus. Thank you.